Welcome and thank you for joining us today. We are excited to be presenting the next topic in our webinar series, which today will be banner communications management. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items wanted to go over. You should have come into the meeting on mute. We do ask if you could stay on mute to reduce any background noise. We would appreciate that. If you do have questions during the presentation, there is a chat box at the bottom of the Zoom menu. You can type in your question and we will get to those at the end of the session. Finally, the session will be recorded today, so this will get sent out next week. So you'll have a copy of the recording, but please feel free to still take notes if you'd like to do that. For our presenters today, we have Jay Deckman and Linda Bloom. They are two of our senior banner consultants who have many years of experience working with the various modules of the banner ERP. Jay is one of our banner development resources and Linda is one of our banner student consultants. Before I turn it over to them, we're just going to do a quick poll to see who is in our audience today. So if you wouldn't mind taking a quick minute, I'm going to launch the poll. And we'll just give everyone a few seconds to vote here. Okay, so about 60% of the audience is the admin functions, and then 20% are executive level and 20% are technical. So we appreciate you voting and happy to have you here today. So with that, I will turn it over to Linda.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome everyone. From Jay and I, welcome and thank you for taking your afternoon to come talk to us and have a discussion about banner communication, BCM. A quick agenda. We were going to go over the overview of what BCM really is, and then the setup, the actual process flow, how do you get your communications out? And then we're going to talk about the functionality for the administrative staff. How can they use it to interact with the students? A lot of great tips here. And then we're going to talk about, with Jay, installation security, and go into some details, right, Jay? We're going to go into some details.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, we're going to talk about the installation security and a few things more, and hopefully get you squared away on the technical side. And then we're going to end up with a wrap up and a Q&A.
Okay, so let's get started. Why BCM, right? There's a lot of reasons. And we've heard a lot of things over the years about BCM, but this is an extended communication system, separate from Banner, but it works and incorporates with Banner directly. It is very flexible. You can create and design and customize a lot of the communications you want to send, be it to admissions, to financial aid, to the registrar areas, or after students graduate. You want to have an alumni section or work with events planning on your campus. Because it has a lot of multiple communication channels. Email, you can print out letters, they call PDF, and then you can send them out, or you can also use the mobile notification options. The bottom line to all this is a great tool, and it's going to save you time for the front desk people, the kiosk group, or the help desk people. Student or a user gets a communication from you and they have questions. They contact you. They want to know, want someone immediately to answer their questions. The beauty of the tool, which is known as interaction, which we'll talk about later, is that you can log in, as long as someone has access, log in and see what the person on the other end of the phone or from the email is talking about, and you can see exactly what they received. And that way, that does save a lot of time because it's almost an instant help desk kind of thing. So that's one of my favorite areas of this. But those are the real reasons of why BCM for right now. So quickly, and I started talking about this, BCM overview. You can create and send messages to anyone with a banner ID. You can do it one time, or you can schedule future dates or recurring. So say it's Monday. You know this message has to go out on Friday, and it's going out to a group of people, but it's all ready to go. It's all ready to be set up, and you just want to get it done. So you can set everything up on Monday and schedule it to go out on Friday at a certain time. And then you can do large and small groups. The largest one I ever sent was for 150 people, or you could do just one at a time. You can track it, date and time it, set up by departments, and then choose your senders, and view your senders through all your communications, and then view the messages. And that's where, again, you work with the student support group and the help desk to help out in case there's a question. The bottom line to all this, it can be personalized and it can be customized. General use, I briefly mentioned this, be annual, by term, that's your choice, and how you define what departments and your organization of who's going to be sending out certain communications by department. It's a great reminder. Hey, students, don't forget, next week, your registration starts. Or by the way, the summer events are coming up. Don't forget about July 17th kind of thing, great reminders. It's also great for missing items. So if you're using Slate to banner for your missions or other products, third-party products, you can send out messages to students. Thank you for applying. We would like to consider your application. However, we're missing a few things, and then list them. For events, football events, sports events, concerts, anything on campus that you have, any organization, great invitation and great reminders of all the activities that are coming up. And again, back to the student support and helping, people can use this automatically to answer questions. So before we begin, we have to think about the styles of communication. What is the best productive way to organize a communication to get to the audience that you want to get the best response? So we're going to talk about a few things here real quick. We're going to define them. Overall, what's the key purpose and the intention of your communication? We all know, right? You send something, a text message looks a little different than a letter, and then email and any kind of mobile device. Everything looks a little different. Okay, based on that, what's going to be the purpose for your audience and what's the intention? And then what data are you going to incorporate into your communication? Is it straight text? Are you going to use multimedia? The formatting and layout, again, goes with the structure of who's going to get it and what are they going to view your communication on, what kind of device. And then your links and images, your overall branding. How is that going to emphasize your market and what you want to communicate to the students or any other user? So real quick, patterns of communication. This is straight out of marketing, instructional design, and graphic design. Informational messages, right? We get them all the time, every morning. You want a logo, you want your branding, you're an image, you want a date, times, first and last names, and your banner ID. Say if this was a student one. Certain URLs, please go to our website if you want additional information or to fill out a form, or contact information. Feel free to contact us if you have any questions. All that goes into a straight informational message. You don't really have a lot of media in these because you're just giving out information to a particular specific type of audience, and you just want them to know. The other part of that is the directional and the informative message. These are much more embedded in kinds of information. Definitely you have your branding, your logos, your media, you have your dates and times and your banners, and the names, your user who's getting these. But then you also have, YouTube videos, or you might want to incorporate images to links to other parts of your website. So this becomes a huge factor when you want to direct a user from your communication to go to a specific type of information. Now, this also helps with financial aid. You can embed tables pulling from award letters, the cost of something, housing, so on and so forth. So this is a great way to get loans, employment information through a table. And again, that's a directive and informative type of message. And again, goes with the layout and the organization of how you're going to set this up. So with that in mind, let's use these as an example when it comes to embedding into BCM. So we have our 2 templates right here, right? I've already showed you these, right? We have our basic information on one side, and then we have the directive informational type on the other. From here, we have our branding, right? We have our branding of the images, and then we have our date, term, ID, students, all that information, that's the information part. And then we have our basic text, right? Everything is a text. From here, if we want to have financial aid information of packaging, we would incorporate that kind of information. And then also the media. Maybe you want to embed a YouTube or a link to a YouTube video or some other video, and then links to certain types of websites. And then you have your overall links, contact, website directive right in the text. So you just take all of that and lay out how you want your communication to be set up. Once you have that in mind, you're ready to go. And then we start with the process of how all this really works. So we figured out what we want to say, but how does this really work in BCM? Well, straight from Lucian, here is the process flow from the data. BCM does not create data, it pulls data from Banner databases. So your population, you decide who's going to get your communication. The queries, what is going to be built? What content, what criteria are you going to select for the information that you want to send out to the user? And then, so that's on one side. And then on the other side, we have the template, the database, and the parameter type of module inside of BCM. So your data fields, you want to pull specific personal kinds of information based on the population that you're choosing. And then from there, your overall data field parameters. These are flexible and can be reused for more letters or information or communications along the way. Once all that's determined, then you create your template, which is kind of like creating your communication. And then that all gets together, you test it, you publish it, then you're ready to send. And that goes through the communication part of BCM. It goes out. If there's any issues, they come up right away and Banner tells you, hey, these 3 or 4 people didn't get their communication and this is why. And then you fix those. And then when it's all done, and once all the communication goes out, then the interaction module, that's for the front end group or help desk when they have questions and they can immediately look it up and look at exactly what the user on the other end of that has their questions on and can help them out. Now, the 3 folders on the side, the system function, logs, and folders. The system function is an admin. This is where you set up your original organization. An organization in BCM defines a group. So maybe you want to have a financial aid organization, an admissions organization, a registrar, or additional options, an alumni, a veterans, however you want to define it. Each one has their own organization. And in that organization, they are going to have folders, right? They're going to house and store the communications that they send. And then the more you have, the more you can archive. And then the logs is a communication log, another admin function. As you can see, all the communications that went out from all the different groups. And if there's any issues, those will pop up in the error logs within the logs. So that's pretty much it when it comes to BCM and the overall process flow. From there, here's the landing page. This is what it looks like. It's pretty straightforward. Each of these modules, I outlined the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because that's really how this whole thing is set up. You set up your organization under system functions. Then you set up your folders with who's going to house, store all the communications. And then you work on your populations and your queries, and then your data fields and parameters, and then eventually templates under 5. Then when it's all tested out, you send it through communications, and then the interaction or the user level that can actually view and communicate and help support people. And then the logs is an admin function to see if there's any errors. So let's take these one by one real quick. So system function, this is what it looks like. These are your general settings. You define the name for your organization and description if you want. And then you set up the email accounts that go with your organization. These are good for testing. And also, you could do 2 or 3 of them. The schools I worked at, we had some 3 to 4 to 5 sometimes, because we had testing emails, and then we also had a general one. So because we know on all our communications, even though it says contact us, people just hit, especially the emails, they just hit reply. So we had an email just for the reply. So we set up the reply email mailbox account, and then a sender mailbox account. That's where the test comes in. So this is a great way to start the structure and organization. And then on the banner side, you're starting to define your rules, your confidentiality tables, what are you going to need, your populations, and Jay will go into that a little later. From there, you're going to set up your folders. You're pretty much setting up your file cabinet. Just real quick, if you look at this folder image straight from BCM, if you look under folder names, they start with CM. BCM comes with defaults already set up that you can use, and they all start with CM, communication management. And that way, this is one of the ways I learned this. I started looking at all the templates and defaults that they had set up within BCM, and I actually learned the structure and realized that it's very linear, but it's also very user-friendly on a lot of levels. And so that's how I started learning it, but that's how you do. You set up your folders to go with your organization. So, within the registrar, you might have 4 or 5 different kinds of folders. It all depends on how you want to set this up. And then the populations. Again, you're going to go on the banner side to set up your populations and what's needed with those populations, what kind of data is going to be incorporated, but you're going to give it a name and then a description and then a folder name. So the folder you chose for your department or your organization is going to be defined here. And again, looking at this image, these are the defaults. Everything that starts with the CM is a default. And then the last little line that says, would you like to share this population? By sharing it, you're letting other people see it and use it, but you don't have to. That's up to you if you want to or not. And that's an M decision on a lot of levels, but this is the way how you set up a population. You also can regenerate populations. So say, you worked with a group of people and you decided that this is a certain group of a population or a combination that you want. And then you can choose to activate the generate population. So if you want to send out another communication or have a recurring communication, it will automatically update on the date and time when the communication is sent out. It never changes the original population. It just adds any additional updates to that population. So if you had students graduating and they have a different email, but you want to keep them in the same population, this is a great tool for that. And then queries. You decide your name. Again, your name, you decide what folder, the types of queries, the SQL statement or the population selection, and then the entering of the SQL statement, and then the overall validation. And Jay's going to go a little more into that a little later. So overall, the next thing, once you have all that in place, then you go to the templates, data fields, and parameters module. And this really much decides, they're all under one. So as you can see from this image, the templates, data fields, and parameters. So it's good to always set up the data fields and parameters first, and then test out. And then we go to the data fields. Again, you see the CM, these are all the default options. There's a lot of choices here as examples that Lucian already provides, but this is where you start pulling data from Banner. And from that, Jay, I think you have some things to say about this.
Right, thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I wanted to jump in here and mention that the The strength behind these data fields and also the queries is that it's all pulling from the Banner database using SQL. Because of that, we can make it very powerful. We can go in and get basic data like addresses and things like that. We can also do calculations, like figuring out GPA and other things like that, things that aren't like standard in the database. So I think it's important to note just how powerful you can get in here. It can be pretty basic. It can also be very complex and get you pretty much whatever data you want. And I will go into a little bit more detail into that at near the end.
All right. Thanks, Jay. And then parameters. Again, the same kind of setup like data fields. You can define them, give it a name, title, but here you have 3 different types. You can make a date, a number, or actual text, so that you can define your different variables and specific values that will support the data fields from this. And Jay, is there anything you want to add to this one, or are you going to talk about it later?
Well, I actually really didn't go into parameters, but the important part with the parameters, they're what you would use in your data fields to kind of customize it. So term code would be a great parameter. So you can have that be, so when you check that data field, it'll prompt you for a parameter, in this case, say term code, and it'll get you the data for just that term. So that's one of the, I guess, the best uses for a parameter.
All right, thanks. So you're ready. You're ready to build your communication. After all that's set up and done, you go back to the template option, you give it a name, describe it. You select your folder, this is going to be financial aid, admin, the admissions area, register, events, anything you want. But then you have a communication code. Now, this is actually incorporated with the communications with the general mail, the GER mail. So as you can see from that list that's there, you have a lot of choices. By default, it comes up as cm.com item send from BCM application. One of the schools I worked with always used this. They just left the default. Another school made it a little more specific. So if it had something to do with admissions and an admit, they chose admit. If they had something to do with degree audit, they chose an item under degree audit and so on and so forth. But it's up to you how you want to use that. And then you have your communication methods, email, letter, SMS, mobile notification. It's up to you. How do you want to decide how you want to send this? It'll always tell you who created it. And then if you want to validate, a certain date that it starts and it ends. When I was talking about, creating something on a Monday and having it sent on a Friday, this is a piece of it. And then the last question, would you like to share? Would you like to share this, or would you like to keep this within your environment? So that's how you set it up. And once that's done, you come to the content area. So I chose email, and pretty much it kind of looks like a mail merge kind of thing. You have your email address that you created in systems functions. You give it a subject. And then you choose your data fields that you want to use. So maybe you want a date, student name, and address, banner ID, and so on and so forth. Or the customized ones that you have created, you can incorporate here. And then you can add your images and your formatting and layout, pretty much what we talked about before. And once that's all done, you save it, and then you can test it and send it to make sure everything is going through correctly. And if it doesn't go through the test, Banner will let you know, and it usually tells you what's missing. So this is a wonderful way to actually, plan, organize, and structure certain kind of communications that you want to send out on a recurring basis, and also use it certain times a year. And then the communication, when it's all ready, it's all tested and it's published, then you want to send it. And again, they all kind of look the same, these pages, but you give it a name and you choose your organization. You pull your template, you pull your population, and then under the schedule, do you want to send it right away? Do you want to time it? Or do you want to even make it recurring? And if you want recurring, what day of the week? How many times a week do you want to send it? You have that option. Or do you want to define it by a month, a certain times during the month? This is where you have your choices. And you could choose the number of occurrences of how many times you want it to be sent out. So that's the beauty of this. And this is where it saves time, where you can set these up. And then when they run on the communication job side, it'll show when they're completed. They go through a color scheme, right? Green, obviously go, everything went through. Yellow, most of them probably went through, but there might be one or two that didn't. My experience, it was usually a typo in an email or just an email not working. And then there's the red. There might be a bigger issue. And they'll tell you what that issue usually is. Again, my experience, I was always told what the issue was. So this also tells you, not only can you send it, you also find out what's missing and if there is an issue. And then when it's all said and done, the front desk, the kiosk, the help desk, they can go into the interactions area. And if a student says, hey, I have a problem, or user says, I got this email. So you can either get a banner ID for search, or you can get the name of the communication that they received, and you can visually see what they're talking about. And usually I was always able to help at that point, and my staff, on how to actually help people along the way, because we could see it and we could almost answer them immediately or within a few seconds or minutes even, depending on what it was. And this does save a lot of time, and staff really do like this. So it's a wonderful tool. So with that, that's pretty much it for BCM. You create your organization, your folders, and then your queries, your populations, your data fields, and your parameters. So you get all your branding and your structure together within your template. It's ready to go. And then you create your template and put everything in and test it so you can send it out and run a communication. And then it'll be listed in your communication job if it went through successfully. And then once it's through, you have the option to view all the communications that were sent in your folder. And then depending on how large your folder gets, you can start archiving them. And that's it for the process part. Whoops. So now we're going to move on to the technical part. And Jay, why don't you tell us?
All right, so it's time to get technical. Don't worry, I'm not going to go into too much detail. Luckily, there's not that much detail to go into that's very specific. So let's just get started and look at the installation. So the reason why I'm not going to go too much into the installation is because this is pretty much a standard Banner self-service installation. You have to install the WAR file, you have to make some customizations to it for your institution, and you're pretty much done. There are some BCM specific ones, and we'll talk about them next. I just wanted to go over real quick the basic requirements for getting Banner self-service set up. There's not a lot here that's going to be difficult. Obviously, you need a web server, so just more of the decision on which side you want to go. And you do need to make sure that you're on Banner General 8.12 and Banner Common Database Upgrade 9.2 or later for both of them. As long as you're there, you should be able to get this installed and set up and get working. All right, so let's go to the next slide to look at the BCM specific configurations. So one file that's delivered in the WAR file is this communication management configuration.groovy file. And in that file is where you're going to set up the decisions that you make in your setup, for instance, which web server you're going to use. You can enable and disable some background processes, and you will set up SSO or MEP here if you're using either one of them. The other place where you'll do some configuration is in the Banner admin table form, that is, GUA conf. For the most part, all that's in there is options about how you use the recurring schedule. There are some advanced options in there, and it also lets you know how nitty-gritty you can get with can you send messages out at a certain minute of the day all the way up to yearly. I'm not sure why you would want minutes, but it's there and it's an option we can choose to go with. All right, so let's talk about security. So basically, in order to get into BCM, you need 4 things set up for you. The basic thing is you need to have a Banner ID, so a record on Spaden. You also need to have a self-service PIN on the GoPad form. Now, if you're using SSO, you're probably not going to need this PIN. You still need the record to exist in order for you to get the access. The next step you need to do is you'll need to have an Oracle account created on GSA Secker. While there, you're going to link that count to your banner account, your banner ID, that is. And the reason for that is that all the web teller stuff, which is the next step, is connected by banner ID, and you need those to link together. So the last thing on GSA Secure is you're going to set up your BCM specific security, and we'll talk about that on a later slide. So as I mentioned earlier, the last thing you're going to do is pick one of these three slides or one of these three roles from web tailor. I'm going to go with them in detail again on the next two slides, but they are an application administrator, an author, and a user. So let's look at the next slide for some details. So your application administrator is the person who is your primary support for BCM. They're the ones who can access everything. They can look at everything. They can make updates to anything. And you're going to want a few of those people who do it because you need someone to go in there and set it up and someone who can go in there and help when there's an issue. The next level of role is going to be your authors. These are your power users. So these are people who are designing your letters, developing which data is going to go in them, and then eventually publishing the templates so they can be used by other people and the admin staff around your campus. The lowest level is the user. So these are the people who their job is to send out the communications. They use the templates that were developed by the other roles, and then they're going to be able to use them to send out the information to whatever population they are looking to contact. Now, if we look at the next slide, this slide goes into a whole lot of detail about specifically what those roles can do. I've highlighted some of the fields in here so you can see which is different between the one column and the column to its right. So as you can see in organizations, they can do everything and nobody else can do anything at an organizational level. To make the long story short is the very top level things are only good for the communication admin, and the content admin is able to do the adds, edits, and deletes, while the users are not able to do anything that requires modifications. And it's important to note that the content admin can only make updates to things that they have created themselves. So they can't go in and update things that other people have made and cause issues that way. All right, so now let's get into the banner security. So Illusion delivers two objects that are important for banner security. They are the CM query execute object and the ban default CM query execute M role. Now I'm going to call that the role from now on because that's too much to keep saying. So that role contains the minimum database access needed to access BCM. So that's going to allow you to add templates, add data fields, and all those other pieces, and also to be able to read them and access all the data you need to do BCM. But it's not going to be enough to access the data you need to get the data, the specific data for your department. So it is recommended that we create department-specific roles where you copy the main role and you add in the department-specific access you need. So that way you would have one role for like admissions and one role for registration, and they would then be able to separate out the permissions so you're not getting too much data to the wrong people. So that brings up my next slide, which is that there is a security issue that we have to deal with. There is another product for Banner called Action Item Processing. And I want to read you the, sorry, wrong page. So Action Item Process is used by Banner to send messages to people that you want to kind of interrupt their day. So for instance, if you need to get like the cell phone from all of your students before they can come onto campus, you could have a part that says when they register, it says it will interrupt their registration and prompt them for that cell phone. So the reason why I bring it up is that AIP is tightly linked to BCM. They share populations, they share queries, and they also share security. And that's where the problem arises up, that for someone to be an AIP administrator, they must have access to the CM query execute object with the ban default M role. And if someone is both an AIP administrator and a BCM user, then they're going to have that ban default M role. And the real problem is that that ban default M role gives you access to pretty much every single thing in the database. So you can get in there and see social security numbers, salaries, all kinds of information. Anything you want to find is going to be there. So that's not a huge deal in AIP because AIP doesn't really have access to data. It can use populations, but it's not going to be able to get and look at data. But in BCM, you can look at data. So if someone has band default M and is a user in BCM, they can access any data they want from the database if they built the SQL correctly. Now, we have found some solutions to them. They're not great, but they do work. The basic one is don't allow the same person to be an AIP administrator and a BCM user. And the other one is only let the AIP admins be people who already have the band default M access. Usually that's going to be like developers, but it's one of the few solutions that we found that work. And there is a defect in with Elution about this. So hopefully they'll separate out the permissions later and AIP can run on its own permission tree and not have to be so well integrated with BCM. All right, so the last thing I want to talk about is how SQL is used within both the data fields and the queries, and then how the formatting can work. So one reason I want to bring this up is because it really goes into how powerful you can get your data to be. So let's start with the basics, is that in order to use these SQL, you have to have just really a couple of things that must be true. The main one is you have to use a select statement. And in SQL, I can say that's how you get data from the database. So that makes sense. You must have the security access to the tables and views that you're using in your select statement. And there are a few reserved words and symbols that you can't use because they interfere with how this functions, but there's none of them are anything that's going to really cause any problems. So the other requirements are that for data fields, you must have the :PIDM parameter in your where clause. And then for queries, they must return a PIDM. So because of those rules, that really can tell you that you can really do anything you want with an SQL as long as you can get the right permissions. So I can do anything complex I want because I can pull from views and I can pull from even functions that are stored in the bottom or in the database. So real quick, to go into the formatting, I wanted to talk about this because it shows the versatility of the data that's coming out. So if you want to have a placeholder in your data, so you can, for each field that you return from your select statement, you're going to want a placeholder in your formatting. And that's done by putting a $ around them. So as you can see with my single value there, whole status would be one parameter sent in to the formatting. You can also do a multi-line one by simply using HTML to help format what you're doing. And that's where the second line there is. And now the list of values is where it gets really interesting. So if I wanted to pull in all the funds that someone has been awarded to in financial aid, I could have a list of them all set out as, or I could have them come over with both the name and the amount. And then I could set it up with the process, with the format you have listed there under list of values. And that will work kind of as a loop, and it will end up creating a table that is very easy to look at and work with. And I'll show you another example of that on the next page. Right, so here, this is an actual SQL that's being used at one of the schools we work with. In the left-hand box, you can see an SQL statement that is pulling the financial aid award information. It pulls out the code title, and the amount. And in the far right, it's a little small, but the formatting, you can see they have an HTML table there. They have a header row, and then they use that special formatting code to create the table of data. And if you look at the bottom, you can see exactly what it'll look like after it's run. And that's using the field test capabilities within BCM. So you can see exactly how it would help you when you test it. And I think that's pretty much what I've got for the technical side. But now it's on to next steps.
That's great, Jay. I mean, that helps because, it makes it easier to understand how all this works together. So what are the next steps? How could you use BCM in your environment? Think about it. Think about everything that we just showed you. Is this something that you can incorporate and utilize into your system? Most of the time, the answer is probably a positive one. Yes, there's a setup, no question about it. You have to review your current settings and your banner security. But overall, think about how you could use this. Map out the types of communications you would like to send and who will receive them. You review the installation and security options. And then you can define, once you determine that, what are your certain timeframes? Can you set this up to automatically send certain types of messages throughout the year or a certain part of the semester and so on and so forth? Because the bottom line is you can customize and personalize to what you need. This is kind of like an a la carte menu in a lot of ways. After all the setting and testing is done. And then you create your communications, you test, you publish, and then you send. And then the critical thing from the people I worked with in my experience is using it to help support students or users or anyone that received the communication, because they had the option to log in and find the communication that the person was talking about, and then they could work with them to answer their questions. And that usually took, maybe 1 to 2 minutes at the most. And in the long run, I had one staff member say to me, wow, I have so much time. I can actually talk to students again. So it turned out to be a really wonderful thing from my experience. But, look at your environment and see where you can go from here.
Great. Thank you, Jay and Linda. Looks like we have a few questions in the chat so far. First one is, can you set up a message that is sent based on a certain data trigger? An example could be a follow-up email from admissions a month after the student is accepted.
Jay, you want to take that?
Yeah, I can say is I think that there's nothing specifically set up to do this, but I'm thinking now that I've never done it, but I think there would be a way you could do it. Because you could set up in the SQL something that looks for people who are, have been accepted a month ago. Then you could actually set up a recurring message within BCM to run like every day, and it would just send the message out to the people who fit into that category. I'd have to look at exactly how that could be set up, but I think it could be done.
Yeah, Jay is actually right. In fact, I didn't do that specific thing with one of my schools, but we defined it in the SQL for student setup, and then we put in within the SQL, a certain date range. This group of population. If we didn't hear from certain people, we put in a certain date range of when the next letter was going to come out. We did it in 2 different communications, but we used kind of the same SQL, Jay, to get it out. So I think you're absolutely right. I think it can be done. It would be a matter of setting up the parameters in SQL.
Great. Next question, can you discuss the use of interactions?
Sure. I'm not quite sure what you mean by use of interactions, but basically use of interactions is it stores all the communications that have been gone out through all the departments. So depending on how many departments and how much rights the person has on their end, what they can and cannot see. But basically you log in, you click on interactions, and you can choose. There's a big search thing, kind of like a Google thing. You search for a certain type of communication. So if you have them you're classified as FA for financial aid, REG for registration, ADM for admissions, VET for veterans, EVT for events. Those are the ones that I'm familiar with. You can actually search for that and then find a communication, or you can put a search for a communication name, right? Since you're giving these templates a specific name, you can search by name, and then that'll bring up the communication. Or if you have a student in front of you and you can just, they say, hey, I have a question, you can just say, what's your banner ID? And if they give you your banner ID, you can put it into the search and it'll list all the communications that were sent to that particular student or that specific student. And then from that list, you can pick and choose which one they'd like to discuss. So that would be the big use. It helps a lot because you can pull up immediately, find out what someone's talking about on a visual level. It shows you what they're talking about. So for me, I think the use of that was critical. And I know the people I worked with, they loved it because it made the process easier instead of trying to ask more questions on a telephone call. Or you get an email from someone and you're not quite sure what they're asking. Because, you know, with this, they had specific information or they could ask for specific information and then pull up and visually see what the question was about. Or work with the student on their questions or whomever. So for me, that's the use. And I hope that answers the question.
Eric, did you want to, I saw you
Yeah,
come off
so-
mute. I don't-
Yeah, I just took myself off mute. Thanks, Jessica. Good to see you. We're looking at implementing this and primarily starting out with using interactions while we look at migrating our mail merge processes into Communications Manager. And it's really for tracking those students who may wind up getting bounced from office to office for things, to see what they were, who they talked to previously, what they may have been told previously, so that there's a consistent record across multiple offices. When you sometimes, we all have students who will from time to time just go to office looking for a different answer.
Right.
And I was really interested to see if that's something you had experienced using this for. We really do not want to go the route of a full-fledged CRM tool and build something out manually for that, when I think the interactions function within Communications Manager could handle it. The other thing with that is I did not hear in the presentation the use of sending SMS messages and what that entails from the technical side or the configuration side. Thank you.
Okay. Jay, you want me to go first or?
Yeah, you can go first.
Okay. So back to your question about interactions. It is a great question. You can't really, you know, this is not a CRM, right? Because you already acknowledged that. The schools the two schools that I worked with, we used Spaceman or Space Mountain, to keep the comments, and that was a mandatory requirement. So we keep as much information as possible. But because you can't put comments into this, we use that instead. But I have to tell you, a lot of times, when we had someone walk into our office and have a question, we just pulled it up and just were able to answer the question right away. And the little things, it was just mostly a miscommunication of something or a misunderstanding. And those we never documented. But we did put into the comments, oh, so-and-so student came in today and asked the question and we resolved it from a BCM letter. And that's all we decided to write. So we kind of made our own little scripts of what to put in comments so we could, fulfill the requirements of the college on keeping the communication. If it got a little more complex, and obviously we add more detail, right? But having that person visually see what the student was asking actually eliminated the bouncing from office to office. And I know exactly what you're talking about. This kind of took away a lot of it. Doesn't take away all of it, but it took a lot of it away because the kiosks, the front end people could actually see what they were talking about, especially when they got phone calls. And as you know, people get very frustrated on phone calls when you don't understand them. But this eliminated, I would say, a lot. And again, I say that from experience, not everything, but eliminated the little stuff because we could visually see the communication that the student was talking about. So I hope that part answers your question. It's not built yet. Hopefully Lucy will do it because it would be a great addition. But that it really helped that way with that. Now I'll start with SMS and I'll let Jay say, when you choose your template, you choose the SMS function. And then from there, it will ask you some questions. But that's usually set up within Banner, and then you just pick and choose from what it's asking you. But that's about it. It's more of a Banner side setup, and Jay can continue that conversation.
Unfortunately, my site's going to be short in me saying that I actually don't know how the SMS is set up. I'm looking into it now, and once I figure it out, once I get the answer, I will send it to you. So I've got your name written down, Eric. I will make sure I can contact you once I get the information.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're going to investigate that one. We had that question earlier. We're going to investigate that more.
Another question, do these communications write back to GUR mail?
Yes. That's a simple one.
Yeah.
Great. Any other questions? Those were it so far for the chat questions. If you want to,
Yeah, just so
type
you
them
know, the GR mail, that's connected to the communication code when you're setting up your template.
great. Okay, if there are no more questions, we want to thank you again for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it. We're always looking for future topics. So if there's something that is of interest to you that you'd like us to present on, you can send us an email at info@forelli.com. Additionally, on our website, there's a what's happening page, and that details the upcoming webinars that we do have scheduled. So you'll see a list of upcoming events as well as the past recordings. So as I mentioned, you'll receive the recording directly for this presentation, but if you wanted to peruse the other webinars that we've done, the what's happening page is where you can find those previous recordings. So I will close it out and thank you again for your time. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, thank you for coming.